All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining in tonight. My name's Jennifer Dixon, and I'm going to be moderating and playing the host of the hearing later on this evening. So we are here tonight to host an information session and then an official public hearing for an enforcement action against the Neuvokas Corporation up in Ahmeek. So we're going to get started with a few housekeeping related things as we get into the meeting tonight. So all your lines will be muted during the meeting, and there will be an opportunity for question and answer later. Well, folks will be allowed to speak, but I'll go over that in a couple minutes. But we are recording this meeting, so if you have to jump off early, or if you know of friends, neighbors that weren't able to attend tonight but might be interested, that recording will be available to people within the next couple of days or so. So we'll make sure to share that out to folks as well. I like to just talk a little bit about the two sort of portions of the night tonight. So you heard me say information session and public hearing. So the information session is going to be a little bit of a short presentation about air quality division, what we do, how the enforcement process works, very high level. And then we'll talk specifically about the enforcement action against Neuvokas. So that'll be the first part of the night. That'll be followed up by a question and answer where we'll be able to unmute your line so you can ask your questions. You can use the question and answer box to type those questions in during the presentation portion, whatever feels best for you. Once we get done with that, which will be at 7 o'clock or whenever you guys are done asking questions, whichever comes first, then we'll kind of pause that and we'll start the official hearing. So during the official hearing, the decision maker will listen to comments. It kind of starts with a formal statement and ends with a formal statement. You'll be able to make comments on the record if you'd like to. You don't have to do that tonight. We'll talk about other ways you can make comments as well. And then, so there's not really a give and take with that portion. So I just always like to talk a little bit about those two sort of sections of the evening. And if you have questions on that, always feel free to ask as well. So speaking of questions, how can you ask questions tonight? Like I mentioned, you can use that question and answer box at the bottom of the screen. A lot of times folks want to just type a question in as the presentation is going along. Maybe we get to answer that question during the presentation or maybe not. Either way is fine. You can also click that raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen when we get to the question and answer section, and that'll just virtually raise your hand so we know you want to verbalize a question, and we can do it that way. I don't think we have anybody calling in right now, but if we do later, it's very easy for them to raise their hand as well and be able to speak. They just need to press #2 on their phone. So we'll go over that again later as well. This is just a brief agenda. I kind of talked through it a little bit as I introduced the evening, but I want to talk a little bit more in detail. But before I do that, I do want to have our Air Quality Division Director, Annette Switzer, come on. And I know she wants to just welcome people formally to the meeting tonight. So Annette, whenever you are ready, go ahead and take it over.
Thanks, Jen. I just want to take a minute to welcome you and thank you for meeting with us tonight, being here to ask questions and share your thoughts and comments on this enforcement action. As Jen said, I'm Annette Switzer, the Air Quality Division Director, and I'm the decision maker for this action. As the decision maker, I'll be listening closely to the conversation tonight, so when the comment period closes, I have the information I need to make my final decision. I know some of you met with our enforcement and field staff recently to learn more about this process. We appreciate you doing that and hope it was helpful in preparing for tonight. For those of you who may not have been able to attend that last meeting, tonight we're going to touch on the work that we've been doing related to compliance and enforcement at this facility, as well as other details regarding the draft consent order. Comments are important, so we'll talk about what types of comments we can and cannot use in our decision making. I'll be here for the remainder of the meeting, and I encourage you to ask questions, submit comments if you'd like to. Talking with community members like all of you is an essential part of this process. So we thank you again for taking the time to be here with us tonight. Jen, I'm going to pass it back over to you so we can get the rest of the conversation going.
Awesome. Thank you, Annette. Appreciate it. So you met Annette, you met myself. We've got a couple other staff people, a handful, that I'd like to introduce you to before we get into the rest of the session, just so you know who is on the line. So if I can have the rest of my staff people turn your cameras on and then just unmute yourself so that you show up for people so they can see. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of run through everybody, a quick introduction. on who you're going to be hearing from. So Erin Moran is our enforcement specialist on this case. So she's going to be doing most of the presentation. You'll be hearing from her a little bit later. And then Michael Conklin is the district supervisor up in our UP district office. So I know some folks have met him already as well as Erin. So that's great. We also have Joe Scanlon, and Joe is on-ish tonight. He was having some internet issues, so he's going to be listening in. We don't know if we're going to be able to get him kind of as part of the conversation, but he's definitely going to be listening in. And then the other person that I want to introduce is Caitlin DeVries. Caitlin works in our environmental support division, and she's helping out sort of on the back end of the Zoom call, helping us manage questions and make sure that everything runs smoothly and I don't mess up the presentation or anything like that. So thanks to staff for turning your cameras on. Erin, you want to leave yours on, and then the rest of you, if you want to just turn them off for now, that's fine. So again, how the evening is going to run. I'm going to pass the torch over to Erin in just a second. She's going to walk us through that information session, a short presentation on the proposed enforcement action. We'll get to that question and answer session after that. Again, that question and answer session, we'll take that either up to 7 o'clock or when you guys are done asking questions, and then we can start that hearing. So I just always try to give people a time frame so you're not going, when is this hearing, even going to start here? But we want to make sure that we answer as many of your questions as we possibly can tonight. Then we'll run into that public hearing. So the public hearing, again, the staff people that I just introduced, with the exception of Annette and myself, won't be able to give you feedback. So that won't be a question and answer. Sometimes people like to ask questions and when they're giving their comments, and we just aren't allowed to respond in that part of the evening. So I'll remind folks about that later, but definitely 2 specific sections of the night. After the hearing, we will talk about how you can still submit an official comment. You can do one tonight, you can do another one later. If you're not ready or comfortable doing it tonight, you can do it later. The comment period is open until July 16th. So there's definitely time after this meeting to submit those comments in a variety of other ways. We'll talk a little bit about where you can find other information. So sometimes, probably not with this case, but sometimes with either permits or enforcement actions that we have going out, folks are, a little bit later to figuring out what information might be available to them. So we always want to just talk about where you can find other information if you want to dig a little bit deeper into what's going on. And then of course, we'll talk about how you can get a hold of Michael, Erin, or Joe if you have other questions or if you have complaints or things like that. So that was a lot of words. I think I saved enough time to let a few more folks join us tonight. So we do have 6 official attendees, and then you've got obviously our staff on the line too. Just sometimes people want to know how many people are virtually on the meeting. So with that being said, Erin, I'm going to pass it over to you. This is new technology. Zoom just updated their platform. So we're working on, from the same screen, which might not seem like a big deal for those listening, but for us, it saves us some time of like sharing over each other and hoping we're getting the presentation right. So whenever you're ready, Erin, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thanks, Jen. All right, advancing.
Yeah, it looks good. Oh, no, go back to that other one. Yeah, perfect.
There we go. All right, thanks. So as Jen said, I'm Erin. I am the enforcement specialist who mostly worked on this case along with a lot of other AQD staff for our Neuvokas enforcement action. But today, I guess, if you were at the in-person information session that we did, you know that we had some projector issues. And by projector issues, I mean we did not have one. So hopefully today you'll be able to see the slides a little better and maybe get some more information here. So first, I'm just going to do a quick overview of their quality division and enforcement process. And then after that, I'm going to get into more detail about the proposed consent order and enforcement action that we're taking against Neuvokas. So Air Quality Division, or AQD, as you'll hear us say, regulates sources of air pollutants to protect human health and the environment. So we regulate stationary industrial sources, which we also call regulated facilities. So those are kind of 2 interchangeable words there. The AQD has many different roles in regulating air quality. One of our primary roles is to conduct inspections of regulated facilities to make sure that they're following the air quality rules and regulations when they're operating. So we conduct regularly scheduled inspections throughout facilities throughout the state. And we also inspect facilities when we receive complaints from the public for any issues that they might see with the facility. So to set the context of the enforcement action, first I'm going to go over Neuvokas's specific air quality violations. So we started receiving odor complaints from residents around January of 2021. Since then, we've continued to receive odor complaints from residents living near the facility. Unfortunately, due to the distance from the Marquette office to Ahmeek, it has been a challenge to be able to timely investigate odor complaints. But due to these complaints on 4 separate occasions, we were able to timely investigate, and we found Neuvokas to be in violation of what is called Rule 901B. So Rule 901B is a state of Michigan rule that says the company shall not have air emissions that cause unreasonable interference with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property. And this covers odors. So when we have come up there for odor investigations, we're looking to see if odor levels meet certain criteria that would result in a Rule 901B violation. So on those 4 occasions that I mentioned, we did verify violations of Rule 901B, and we issued violation notices to Neuvokas. And so these 4 violations have since been referred to escalated enforcement to for us and the company to address. So to step out a bit, I want to just give a general overview of the enforcement process and kind of show you where we are in that process. But before we even get to escalated enforcement, there is a process that we follow to address all air quality violations that we find at facilities in Michigan. So the process starts with an inspection. Like I said, we do those physical inspections, and we inspect in response to complaints. We also can request records for review from the company, and they also, facilities send us just regular records for review. So in any of these cases, it's possible for us to find violations. So in this case with Neuvokas, we inspected in response to those complaints and found violations for odor due to receiving those odor complaints from community members. So in any case, if a violation is found, we send what is called a violation notice. So this is more of like an official letter that lets a company know that we found an air quality violation and that they're going to need to address it. So whenever we send out a violation notice to a company or a facility, they have time to respond to us and let us know how they're going to correct their violations and give us a timeline in which they are planning on correcting these violations. So with each of the violation notices that we sent Neuvokas, they did respond to us and outlined solutions that they were thinking would fix these odor problems. After a while, though, we did work with them, but it did become clear that the odor issues weren't being fixed in a timely manner, and that the community was still, being affected by odors from the facility. And it was at this point that we decided to escalate the violations to enforcement. So whenever, a district and enforcement decide that violations should be escalated to enforcement, our district staff write an enforcement referral. And so this is just kind of an official way of sending those violations to enforcement to be resolved. So after we receive that in the enforcement unit, we send what's called an enforcement notice. So an enforcement notice is, again, sort of a more official letter that lets a company know that they will have to resolve their violations through a legal process. This is usually through a document called a consent order, which I will describe in the next slide. But the enforcement notice requests an initial meeting with the company. And then we have an initial meeting, and also, there are subsequent meetings and discussions with the company about what their plan is going to be to address their air quality violations. And during this enforcement process, we're coming up with a compliance plan that they're going to follow. So once this process takes place and we can reach an agreement upon everything that needs to go into the consent order, the Air Quality Division is required to hold a 30-day public notice and comment period where anyone can submit comments about the consent order. So this is where we are right now in the process, is that public notice and comment period. And in, not all cases, but some cases, especially cases that we know that there is community interest, we do hold a public hearing, such as today, as part of our public comment period. So after this period is over, AQD will look at all of the on-topic comments that we receive from folks. And if there is demand from the public on an item in the consent order that the AQD is able to change, we may go back to the company and propose these changes in the consent order. If there are no changes, or we don't receive any comments, or we get comments and we agree with the company on the changes, we then move forward to sign the consent order. So both the company and AQD sign this legal document, and after that is when the company is legally required to follow what is written in the consent order. So as I kind of said before, escalated enforcement is the legal process which we use to resolve violations that were cited and sent to enforcement. The end result of this enforcement process is usually what's called an administrative consent order. This is a legally binding contract between AQD and a company. Most violations that are escalated to enforcement are resolved through a consent order. A consent order is an administrative settlement, so we are legally required to offer a settlement to a company in enforcement before we consider escalating the violations even further, such as to be resolved at the Department of Attorney General or through the Environmental Protection Agency. But a consent order really has three main parts. It contains a compliance plan that the company is going to be required to follow after it's signed. This will address their air quality violations and hopefully prevent those violations in the future. There's also payment of a monetary fine, and we also have what are called stipulated fines outlined in the consent order in the case that we find violations of the consent order in the future. So in the next few slides, I'm going to move into a summary of what is in the proposed consent order for Neuvokas. So this slide is kind of a higher level overview of their compliance plan. So in the consent order, they will be required to comply with Rule 901. So that's comply with that odor rule, and also a nuisance minimization plan for odors. This is a plan that AQD has reviewed and approved before we put it out for public notice and comment. They are also required to install a vertical stack on one of their manufacturing lines, and this is going to improve dispersion of the air emissions that are coming from the facility. Neuvokas actually did complete this installation on May 31st of this year. So it's kind of a check on the compliance plan. They have also hired a third-party consultant to evaluate the facility's entire ventilation and control system, and also to recommend odor control solutions as a result of that evaluation. So they're going to have a third party do the evaluation. After that is complete, Neuvokas will be required to complete odor control solutions that come out of that third party evaluation. So some more detail about the nuisance minimization plan for odors. This is an enforceable plan that lays out what Neuvokas has to do to address their odors. So the current requirements in this plan include that they must vent their exhaust air through a carbon media filtration system. They must use an odor neutralizing solution during their operations. There are housekeeping and waste disposal procedures that they need to follow. They need to properly operate their exhaust fans. When they are manufacturing the rebar, they are going to manufacture it with the film that is going to help contain some of those odors that are coming from the product. And there is also an elevated odor event corrective action procedure that they are going to follow whenever they receive notification from AQD or from the community that someone in the community is experiencing odor issues. And all of these items in the plan are enforceable under the consent order. So I do have current requirements written here in this slide because, if we move forward and we find a better solution for the odor issues, it is written in the consent order that we can ask Neuvokas to revise or change this plan to incorporate those new solutions. So in the case that we do that, the new solutions will be in the plan and the plan will still be enforceable under the consent order. And all of these things listed here have checks and records that Neuvokas has to keep, so we can make sure that they're doing everything properly. So another requirement under the consent order is for Neuvokas to do a third-party evaluation of their entire ventilation and control system in their facility. So before putting the consent order out for public notice and comment, Neuvokas decided on a third-party consultant and worked with them to develop a project proposal, which is included as part of the consent order. So the project proposal is kind of what the third-party consultant is going to look at in the facility and evaluate. So before we agreed to include the project proposal in the consent order, AQD staff did review it and made sure that what the consultant was planning on evaluating was appropriate and that they were looking at all the right things to be able to recommend odor control solutions. So there are four main components to this evaluation. First, they'll be doing an air sampling and analysis. So I should note that this study has already been done. So all of these items on the list here have been completed by the third-party consultant. So they did do air sampling, so that's taking samples throughout the facility and the ventilation system. These samples are going to be analyzed for different compounds that I guess are in the product that may be causing odor issues. They will also be doing an air balance assessment. This is to evaluate the airflow through the facility. They also took samples of the carbon media that is used as odor control, and these samples are being analyzed for effectiveness. They're also going to be doing what is called an air mod dispersion analysis. So air mod stands for American Meteorological Society / Environmental Protection Agency regulatory model, quite a mouthful. But this is a model used by EPA to project air dispersion in an area. And so there's a lot of different data that goes into here, but the output is that it will show where different air emissions will move depending on different factors in the environment and also during the company's operations. So once this evaluation is complete and it's been completed, after they do their analyses and kind of get a report together, Neuvokas, it will be submitting to AQD the consultant's actual evaluation report. And this report must include recommended odor control solutions based on the results of the evaluation. They will also be submitting to us a schedule for completing the odor control solutions that they want to implement. So we do want to give Neuvokas the flexibility to be able to choose the solutions that are best for their facility and that are also going to be effective. But if for any reason there is a recommended solution from the evaluation report that Neuvokas chooses not to do, We are requiring them to provide a justification for why they aren't proposing to undertake that solution. So once we receive this evaluation report and the schedule, we will review it and make sure the odor control solutions and timeline are acceptable. If for any reason we think this plan needs to be modified, we will require that before approving it and before they move forward with like implementing those solutions. And also, again, upon AQD approval, this schedule will be enforceable under the consent order. So they will have to adhere to the timeline that they propose. So the last part of the consent order I want to go over is the fine and stipulated fines. Again, these are part of every consent order that we finalize in the air quality division, I think in Eagle as well. But to calculate the penalty, we use the state of Michigan statutory authority for civil fines. And we use this and also look at the number of days that we cited Neuvokas for an odor violation. So under this consent order, Neuvokas will be paying a fine of $11,000. Every consent order also has stipulated fines. So again, these are potential fine amounts that Neuvokas could be liable for in the event that we find violations of the consent order after it's signed. So kind of maybe an example of that is if for whatever reason we find that they're not following their odor plan, maybe they're not like disposing of their waste properly, we could cite a violation of that and consider fining them for that violation, just as an example. So that's my last slide, kind of wrapping up what's in the consent order. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jen. I think we're going to start the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks for going over all of that, Erin. I appreciate it. Michael, if you want to turn your camera on as well. So just to remind people, I want to see if nope, it's not that slide. Remind people of how we can ask questions. So if you have questions, you can type them into the question and answer box. I think Caitlin put a chat out there, just reminding people of that. You can also use the raise hand icon to raise your hand and we'll unmute you and you can verbalize any questions that you might have. I know folks asked quite a few questions the other day when you guys were up in the UP, so that's great. If this helped everybody and folks have their questions answered, we can move right on into the hearing, but I'll give you a couple minutes just to see if anybody has any questions for folks. And Erin, while we're waiting, I want to say I was very impressed at you defining air mod. I did not know you were going to do that. It is quite a mouthful.
Mouthful, so you gotta explain them all.
We try to stick, veer away from acronyms where possible. Air quality is immersed in acronyms sometimes, and that is one of the more challenging ones, which is why we, do air mod usually. So I was very impressed with that. Thanks for doing that, because I know I didn't know what it meant. In my head, it's only air mod. That's the only thing it means.
I didn't either.
All right, I'll give folks just another minute here or so before we move into the hearing. I don't want to do that too late, or too early, apologies. But of course, there's opportunities to ask questions of Erin or Michael or Joe after this meeting tonight as well. Just to reiterate, and you'll hear me say this again a couple of times, that the comment period is going to stay open until July 16th. So any comments that you have related to the consent order specifically will take up till midnight that day. If you have questions about the consent order or any of the other processes we talked about, I know Erin mentioned our inspection process, how we determine if a violation is warranted. We're always open to answering those questions as well. So yeah, I'll just give you guys another minute or so just to make sure there's no questions. And if there's not, we'll move right into the hearing. All right. Oh, okay. This is a great question. So the question is, so let's say going into the future, Erin, I'm gonna, give this one over to you a little bit first to talk about the first part of it. And then I think, Michael, if you want to talk about the second part. So say the consent order is entered into, it's signed and it becomes effective. How how is compliance with that consent order going to be monitored? So specifically, the asker is asking about stipulated fines and how those would be monitored, whether or not they would need to be issued. Would inspectors be coming once a month or so, or is that, prompted by complaints or things like that? Is there going to be a regular sort of check-in with the facility? So Aaron, I don't know if you want to just talk a little bit more about stipulated fines and how that works. And then Michael, if you want to follow up with, what your staff might do on that.
Yeah, so stipulated fines are going to be the result of any violation of the consent order that we may find. So, obviously we're hoping that there aren't violations of the consent order. And that the company, is gonna, or Neuvokas is gonna move forward and, comply with everything in the compliance plan, that we won't have to issue any stipulated fines. But that said, the stipulated fines are there, and we use them in consent orders as sort of a deterrent and to let the company know that, if we do find violations in the future, you could be liable for a fine. So, again, we would have to either do an inspection or go out there as a result of a complaint, or, review Neuvokas's records about their odor plan, or the third-party evaluation, whatever comes out of that. And it's at that point, when we are evaluating those things, if we find a violation, it's at that point that we would consider a stipulated fine. So it's really only in the event that there is a violation of the compliance plan. And then about the inspections, I'll pass that over to Michael, and he can talk a bit more about the frequency and all that.
Yeah. So regarding the inspections, these are mainly going to be complaint driven. The facility is exempt and they don't hold any air permits. So we will not be doing any self-initiated inspections to determine compliance with the air permit. However, now with the consent order, when that gets issued, this is a legally enforceable document, and they will have a compliance plan that's also legally enforceable. So when we do receive a complaint, we'll be making sure that they're following their compliance plan. They do have a procedure for an elevated odor event. So we'll be requesting records to make sure they're doing their checks on fan operation, their carbon filter checks, and ask for some additional information if there's any upsets in their process. Then we'll also be following our complaint procedure for an odor complaint that we receive. So we will try to follow up with the complainant to gather more information on the time and the weather conditions and the frequency and intensity of the odor that was experienced. And then based on all that information from the complaint and from the facility, then we'll make the call if we need to conduct an on-site inspection and conduct an odor survey. And from that, if we detect odors with sufficient intensity, frequency, and duration, then that could warrant another 901 violation. And then at that point, there could then be stipulated fines assessed.
So as a follow-up to that, while you guys were talking about the draft consent order, and sort of related to this question, is there specific reports that are required or record keeping that's required to be submitted on a regular basis? So even if you aren't doing an inspection on site and going there and looking at it, is there reports that are associated with that draft consent order that you'd be reviewing on a regular basis that would kind of help track whether the company is following the requirements of all the plans and everything that Aaron went over?
Yeah, in the compliance plan, the nuisance minimization plan at the bottom, there is a checklist that the company will be doing to perform daily odor checks. So they'll be going around their facility, checking their proper operation, their ventilation system, and the carbon. So they'll be doing pre and post carbon checks to determine if the carbon filtration needs to be changed, to see how well that's working for controlling the odors, the efficiency. Checking proper fan operation. So they have a daily checklist. They're required to keep records of that, and we can request those records at any time. And then when a complaint comes in, they also have an elevated odor event checklist that they go through. And both of those documents are very similar. So, and they're required to keep those on file, and we can request those.
Okay, yeah, that's helping. Yeah, and you guys can request those at any time. So it's not like it's only once a month or something. If you thought you needed to request them every day, you could, and if, you know, things seem to be going well, then we're not getting complaints, then hopefully we can assume that things are working right. Sorry, I think I advanced that. This is like
That's great.
getting the new system here working. So, all right, yeah, thanks for that question. I appreciate it. It's always good to dig into the details of how this process works, especially if you haven't dealt with it before. It can be just something new, you know, that you have to try to work through and try to understand like how we do our job and how it relates to this specific company in the community there. So appreciate that. Just waiting to see if we have any other questions that come in. Just as a reminder, so we've got about, let's see, I wanted to just let you guys know, we have about 8 people on now, so that's great. People that are outside of, you know, the staff you see here. And if we do have questions, you can just type them in the question box. If anybody wants to ask a question verbally, use that raise hand icon. We're happy to have you speak your question aloud. All right, well, I think we're going to go ahead and start the hearing then. Annette, if you want to turn your camera on, and then Michael and Aaron, thank you so much for being part of the panel. And Aaron, thanks for the presentation earlier today. If you guys want to turn your cameras off, that would be great. All right, so before we get started with the official hearing portion of the night, one of the things that I'd like to talk about is public comments in general. So many times when we're doing hearings like this, if folks aren't familiar with attending hearings and giving a comment on the record, it can be a little bit daunting, or, you know, there's questions about, you know, what even is an appropriate comment. And I think Aaron talked a little bit about this when they came up to the UP a couple weeks ago, but just want to reiterate that anybody is free to submit a comment saying anything. You know, many times we get comments about people either strongly in support or against an action. It's completely acceptable to make those kinds of comments. But another question we get is, you know, I want to influence this action, or I want to have an impact on this action. What kind of comments can I make that will most likely lead to changes that might feel positive for me, or that I feel might be an improvement to whatever the action is? So things that are focused on the content and the basis of the draft consent order. So for instance, if you thought there should be a different way of looking at things, or something should be added to the consent order to increase how the nuisance odor minimization plan was looked at, or things like that, things that are based on the content and that are in that draft consent order. Comments that are requesting specific changes to be made. So like things that say, you know, this is just a, for instance, very broadly, you should fix all the typos in the consent order. That's not as effective as saying like, hey, you guys missed a word in this sentence and now it doesn't make any sense. Something like that. That's obviously a very simple example, but you get the idea. Things that are least likely to lead to changes are things that are outside of the scope of the consent order. So I know Aaron talked to, you know, very much about what is contained in there, and that is a legally enforceable document. So that part becomes very pertinent. And then whether this consent order in general is proposed, I'm sorry, is supported or opposed by the community. So those aren't really things that we can take into consideration when Annette makes her decision on the consent order. So just wanted to talk about that a little bit before we get into the public hearing itself. So again, another thing about this hearing is we're going to take comments on the record. You're more than welcome to make a comment tonight. You don't have to. There's no pressure to do that. You can make one tonight and one later. You can make one just later. You don't have to make one, you know, whatever feels good for you. But there won't be any give and take in this part of the night. So Annette and I are going to listen very carefully to everything that you have to say. But even if you have a question in your comment, we won't be able to respond back to it tonight. So I just always want to be really clear about that, because I know that can be sometimes confusing. So in order to officially start the hearing, I have to unfortunately read a somewhat dry opening statement for you all, just to kind of set the parameters around the hearing. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and then we'll get right into the hearing portion of the night. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jennifer Dixon, and I'm with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, or EGLE. I will be serving as the hearing officer for this public hearing on the proposed administrative consent order for Neuvokas Corporation located in Ahmeek, Michigan. Annette Switzer, Division Director of EGLE's Air Quality Division, is the decision maker for this administrative consent order. The Air Quality Division is responsible for regulating sources of air pollutants to minimize adverse impact on human health and the environment. The law governing these responsibilities is Part 55 of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to allow anyone interested in the proposed consent order to provide information the Air Quality Division can use in deciding whether to approve the consent order as written, or if there are additional issues to be considered. Please recognize that we can only use the information you provide if it relates to the criteria we must use in making decisions. So for example, concerns related to local zoning, truck traffic, and noise are not within our authority. Some of you may want to express your support or opposition to the consent order, and although we'll be happy to make note of your position, please understand that we are by law not allowed to base our decision on whether there is widespread support or opposition to this enforcement action. Please note the proposed terms of the consent order are brought to you tonight in the form of a proposed agreement. So this does not mean that a decision has already been made. Instead, it reflects an initial agreement, including following a compliance plan, paying a monetary penalty, and agreeing to pay additional penalties if compliance is not maintained. Everything in the proposed consent order remains open for comment and further consideration by the division. This hearing is being recorded, and your comments will be part of the information EGLE will consider in making its decision on the proposed consent order. The public comment period for the proposed consent order opened on, I apologize, on June 6th, and will close at midnight on June 16th, 2024. Additional information can be submitted until then, and it will be considered when we make a final decision. After the public comment period closes, the decision maker will review all written and verbal comments received. All significant air quality related comments will be considered, at which point the decision maker will make a final decision on the consent order. The decision maker may reject the consent order, approve it as drafted, or approve it with amendments. If approved, the decision must specify which provisions, if any, have been changed in the final consent order and the reasons for those changes. In all three scenarios, all interested parties, including everyone who was on the original mailing list, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended either the informational meeting or this public hearing, will be directly notified of the decision. As stated previously, you may submit a comment at any time by mail or email. You may also type the word comment into the question box and submit your comment in writing tonight. If you do not want me to read your comment out loud, please state do not read. If you'd like to make a verbal comment, you may raise your hand and I'll unmute your line so you can speak. We'll limit your time to about 3 minutes. We probably won't because we have so few people tonight. And I will do my best to address commenters in the order your hands are raised, but please bear with us as the technology does have some challenges with that. Please recognize department staff are here tonight to provide a fair opportunity for you to express your views on the proposed consent order and to listen to those comments. So thank you so much for your attention, and I will begin calling the names of anyone who would like to make a statement. So if you'd like to make a statement tonight, you want to just go ahead and use that raise hand icon on the bottom of your screen, or we'll give you a minute or so to type anything that you might want to submit as a comment tonight in writing into the question box. And it doesn't look like we have anybody on the phone, so I was just going to remind folks to do #2 on their phone if there was, but it doesn't look like we have anybody calling in. So I'll give you just a couple minutes. Again, no pressure on making a comment tonight, certainly not required. All right, and I'm not seeing anyone who would like to make a comment tonight. Are you okay with me closing the hearing for now?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So I just need to read a quick closing statement and then the hearing will be officially closed and we'll go over a couple other things. So thank you so much for your cooperation tonight. We really appreciate your interest in the proposed consent order as well as the time that you took to be here. As indicated at the beginning of the hearing, the public comment period ends on July 16th, 2024. All interested parties, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended any of the meetings that we held will be directly notified of the final decision on this proposed consent order. The hearing is now closed, and thank you again. All right. So a couple other things to go over before we sign off for tonight is how can you make a comment if you didn't make one tonight and you still want to. You can send an email right to Erin. Her email address is on the screen here. It's just morane@michigan.gov, Michigan all spelled out. You can also mail us a comment. We sometimes talk about this a little bit lightly, but we really will take a comment on a sticky note or a napkin or, you know, anything. There's no real criteria that you need to be able to send us something in writing. Some of the easiest ways to leave us a comment are just to call our public comment voicemail box and then just verbally leave your comment. Sometimes people will write it down and then read it to the voicemail. It all counts, whatever way you do it, it counts the same. It's all weighted the same. We review and look at them in all the same ways. If you want to find more information about how to submit a comment, you can visit the website on the bottom of the screen, which is michigan.gov/Eagle Air Public Notice. That's something that's usually helpful for people as well. On that website, you're going to find things like the proposed enforcement summary. So that's just that high level summary of this action. The summary report and draft consent order. So if you want to dig a little deeper and really read that like legal documentation about the proposed consent order, that's where you're going to find that. We'll also post the meeting recording there as well. And you can find that under enforcement actions on that website. I know I promised how you can get a hold of Erin and Michael and Joe. So on the screen right now, I just have their email addresses and their phone numbers. So feel free to reach out to them, you know, anytime. They're, like I said, they're happy to answer any questions that you might have about the process that we go through, this enforcement action, you know, future complaints that may occur, you know, anything really that you want to know air quality related. These three are definitely open to answering any questions that you might have related to that. Thank you for coming. One thing before I let you go, just as a reminder, is after this meeting, so we will be sending a follow-up email out, and that email will contain a lot of the information we talked about tonight, just because we want to try to give it to you at your fingertips. So we'll do that once the meeting recording is ready. So you'll get a direct link to that meeting recording, how to submit comments if you'd like to still do that, and just some more of the information that we have. And that will get sent to anybody who was at that in-person meeting that was held the other day, anyone who was on the original mailing list, anyone who came tonight. We want to just, you know, broadly let people know how this meeting went, information about it, and then obviously the recording if folks weren't able to attend tonight and are really interested in what happened. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here tonight. We really appreciate it. If you were at that in-person meeting, again, it sounded like it went really well. You know, it was great to be able to get up there and talk to people face to face as well. And we apologize we weren't able to do that for this meeting too. We were sort of reminiscing about how much we enjoy getting up to the UP, and it's a very special place. So again, thanks for taking the time to be with us tonight. And Caitlin, as soon as you are ready, you can go ahead and end the meeting for folks.